Good evening. I'm Carol Portman, and I'm with the League of Women Voters. For 95 years, the League of Women Voters has tried to educate voters before an election so they knew what they wanted to do on Election Day, which is coming up very soon. We have some ground rules tonight. One, the questions, and I will not get to all of them because you don't want to be here all night. The questions cannot be of a personal nature, and the mayors operate on the city of Brentwood. So the questions have to do with that. Each candidate will give an introductory notice, tell them whatever they want for 2 minutes. We have a timer here, Judith Smart, who will let them know. And let me tell you, candidates, I know what a run-on sentence is, and I can stop you. I've been doing this a long time. After they give an introduction, then we'll start with the questions. And each candidate will answer, if they choose, the same question. And they have 1 minute to answer the question. We go in rotation. When we finish with the questions, we then do a closing statement. Each candidate has 2 minutes to give a closing statement. Now the candidates are seated on my left in the order in which, no they aren't. We have, yes, Mr. Toohey, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Thornton. That is how they are listed on the ballot. When they give their closing statement, we will reverse the procedure. I'm sure the candidates will be around if you have some personal questions to ask each and every one. So, timer, are you ready? And Mr. Toohey, 2 minutes to give an introduction of yourself.
Good evening. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting tonight's forum. I'd like to thank the residents for All right. Good evening. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting tonight's forum. I'd like to thank the residents for their participation. I'd also like to thank my fellow candidates for agreeing for the exchange of ideas. For the past 15 years, I've made Brentwood my home because it's a fantastic city with a bright future ahead of it. In fact, when the late Tom Schweik presented the state audit, he opened it up with a glowing endorsement of the city's strong financial position and the future the city has ahead of it. The reason we are in this position is because the citizens have had a tradition of electing a board of aldermen with experience running the city as the mayor. This tradition has allowed, sorry, I lost my place. Unfortunately, despite these great practices, Mr. Schweik also had to discuss the lack of oversight that had been presented from our elected officials in the past. For the past 3 years, I have served as an alderman and on the city's Ways and Means Committee. Through this experience, I have learned about the city's financial processes as well as operational processes. In addition to that, I'm also a licensed CPA with a background in performing financial and operational oversight. This prior experience has given me the ability to lead the city in a future direction, ensuring the bright future which Mr. Schweik spoke about, as well as making sure that the city continues the oversight the residents deserve. As your mayor, I promise that I will lead the city in a future direction with that oversight you all require. And I look forward to addressing your questions tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have next Mr. Wilson. You have 2 minutes to give an introduction.
Okay. Hello, my name is Mark Wilson. Thanks so much to the League of Women Voters for having us here and hosting this, and I appreciate you all coming, because the community and serving the community is what this is all about, making certain that you are heard and that we're able to pass along what your decisions and ideas are. Anyway, I grew up in Brentwood. I was originally from Connecticut, came down here at the age of 5, went through grade school, high school, etc. And I left after high school, went off to college, and ended up turning right back around and returning to Brentwood 15 years later. I've lived in total over 33 years in Brentwood, and have found myself to have a passion for everything in the community and the people of the community. One of the reasons that I got involved in trying to become a part of city government is I came back about 3 years ago, or left Anheuser-Busch, and we had to spend a little bit more time with our son. With that, I was able to get involved with the Financial Oversight Committee for the Brentwood School District, and then I was able to involve myself with a number of other things. With the city, I started to spend a little bit more time paying attention to exactly what was going on. And once the audit came about, I found out about the financial instability of the city. With that, I started to look into the oversight and just how people were being held accountable for things. One of the things that the city is lacking right now is professionalism. We're not being run like a business. We have not shown the transparency, the accountability, and the fiscal responsibility that we need. I'm a manager, a leader, and a communicator to people. I've managed people for over 30 years and managed large budgets and complex projects. I want to serve the community and bring back some prosperity to Brentwood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Thornton.
Before I get started, I see a lot of people in the back that are making motions like this and like that, and I assume it's not because you're so thrilled that we're all here. So I just want to make sure that we can all hear in the back. So is this working? I noticed when the air conditioning kicked on, it got worse. Can we all hear?
Thanks.
No? Tony, no? Okay.
You must be close to.
How are we doing? Test, test, test. Oh, how about this? Test, test. Better? Check, 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 check. I never played in a band, but I do a lot of Guitar Hero. How's that? Better? Okay, I'm sorry. Just thought it'd be better.
That's okay, Mr. Thornton.
All right. I also would like to thank the sponsors of this event, Doug Miner and the 40 South News, the Brentwood School District for allowing us to have it here at this location, and the League of Women Voters, and last but not least, you all for coming out in this weather to enjoy this. I've seen divisions among us. I've seen divisions between the elected people and the people they represent, between the mayor and the board of aldermen, between the citizens and the city government. I want to bridge those divisions. I want to get us working together so we can take advantage of the tremendous opportunities we have before us. This is a pivotal time for Brentwood. I believe the mayor will greatly influence the path of Brentwood's development for the next several years. I want to promote trust in the city government by establishing a culture of openness and promoting the free flow of information between City Hall and any citizen who wants to get involved. This is more than just statutory compliance. It's making information readily available to anyone who wants it in a way that's easy to understand. When I decided to run for mayor, the first thing I did was go and get the publicly available information on the city's budget. And I spent 2 weeks cursing at my wife trying to understand how the city's budgetary process worked. It wasn't until I had several meetings with Bola Akande and Gina Jarvis that I was able to start to understand how the city's finances worked. I think that's too tough. I think when I talked to them, I asked them, is there any reason that we cannot present a city budget much the way our household budget looks? They said there isn't, and I think we should. I want to put an end to the conflict of culture on the Board of Aldermen. I believe the mayor is elected to represent all the people, and I think it's in all of our interests to conduct our business in a professional manner. Too often our meetings have been bogged down in petty disputes, and discussion has been unprofessional and disrespectful. This must stop. If given a chance, I will work in good faith with all the aldermen to work through any problems that exist on the board. It doesn't mean everyone has to agree, but we could certainly present ourselves in a professional manner.
All righty.
Thank you.
What we're going to do is deviate a little bit. We have 4 students from the Brentwood High School debate team, and they will ask questions, and their questions pertain to many that you all have submitted. Let's start, please, with Shama Saunders. They're going to give it in oral. You have to come up to this microphone, speak into it. What? It should. Go ahead.
So my question is, how do you take Brentwood's current state of having a large number of commercial businesses to having more small businesses?
And we start with Mr. Tui. You have 1 minute to answer the question.
Well, as far as the commercial districts, what I would like to do is see them kept in the current corridors they're in. That means remaining north of Black Creek, as well as remaining on the Brentwood and Manchester corridors. There are some circumstances out of our control, such as the state of the economy, and can small businesses actually get business loans to build construction projects. If you look in our surrounding municipalities, we're seeing large big box stores go in place because those types of companies have the ability to get the financing to build their developments. What I would try and do, though, is make sure that the city can streamline our processes efficiently so that small businesses don't have to waste a lot of time in legal fees and other red tape in order to develop in our community.
Thank you. And we go now to Mr. Wilson.
Yes, exactly what I'm trying to do is I've spent the last 2 months meeting with business leaders from around Brentwood, as well as meeting with leaders in other local municipalities to try to understand exactly how it is that they accomplish the program in the Grove, in Maplewood, in Lafayette Square, etc. They maintain the character and also the history of their community while still building. That can be accomplished through working with small business associations and working with different parts of the government distribution in order to accomplish what we want to accomplish, and that is maintain the character of Brentwood while we build. We've got to be reasonable with our growth. But the one thing we don't need to compromise is our residential corridor. While we're building things up, we need to make certain that we're preserving our residential corridor while maintaining the character of our community.
Thank you. And Mr. Thornton.
I don't see any reason why we can't have both. We can have large commercial successful businesses like we have in the Promenade and at Brentwood Point. Those have been without doubt economically successful projects that have benefited the whole community a great deal. While that's true, I don't think that's something that we want to try to repeat everywhere in Brentwood. Take, for example, the development at Hanley Station. I think that has a completely different character than the Brentwood Promenade and the Brentwood Point developments, and I think you see a different character of business there. I think you also see that happening to some extent in the Hanley Industrial Court, where you see it going from sort of a light industrial type of use to small businesses. You've got Fontbonne moved in there, you've got exercise businesses opening up, you've got childcare businesses opening up, and I understand that we're going to get a charity clothing store in that area. So I don't see any reason we can't have both, and as long as we carefully manage that process, it'll work for us.
Our next student is Austin Koster, and we will start with Mr. Wilson.
All right. My question is a little bit similar. How will each of you be able to continue the infrastructural development while not exacerbating the already harmed sense of community that some Brentwood residents feel towards the local government?
I think we're getting right back to the distinction between commercial and residential corridors. I think we're a very fortunate community in that we're roughly the 5th or 6th top sales tax earning municipality in the county. With this, we've got a lot of opportunities. We can be very careful about our growth. We need to, once again, we've had a number of opportunities come about that have lent towards possibly creeping into our residential communities. And we've got a tremendous amount of space. Brentwood real estate is very valuable. And right now we've got a number of areas that need to be attended to. In doing that, we need to make certain that we think about exactly how we're doing it, come up with a strategic plan, and make sure we address the community and hear the citizens in order to feel what they want to accomplish, and then go forward with a plan, with a vision.
Mr. Thornton?
I think it's largely a matter of priorities. I think over the past few years that our priorities have been focused on what I would call bigger developmental type projects that have been extremely, as I said, extremely successful, and they've given us a lot of resources. But I think some of the core services that our community expects from government, such as streets, such as sidewalks, things of that nature, have maybe gone a little bit on the back burner. And I think the way to address the infrastructure issues that you see, the roads and things of that nature, is to prioritize them. I'm not sure what the question means about exacerbation of conflict between the government. I think most people expect the government to provide things like better parks, better roads, better sidewalks, a dog park, things of that nature, and I can't see why anything like that would exacerbate the residents of the community.
And Mr. Toohey?
Well, the first thing I would do regarding the infrastructure is continue a practice we have done with the Ways and Means Committee, is allocate funds from the general fund to the capital fund to replenish streets and repave. We have expedited that process. As far as keeping the corridor separate, I will go back to my last answer where I said keep the development north of Black Creek as well as along the Manchester and Brentwood corridors. In addition to that, I think it's key that the Board of Aldermen monitor the development on these projects and look at underutilized lands and make sure the development stays in those areas so our income remains steady. Right now, the best opportunity I see is looking at redeveloping Hanley Industrial Court. Currently, it's a space of ill-fitting office spaces by accountants, lawyers, workout facilities that I think could be better utilized with the redevelopment project and would not infringe on the residential corridor whatsoever.
Thank you. And our next student is Jonathan Duffy Holmes. And we will start with Mr. Thornton.
All right, my question is, there's been a lot of talks recently of stagnation in the local government. How will you address this polarization while also focusing on developing Brentwood as a community?
Exactly the way I said in my opening statement. I think it's really just changing the culture of our government. I think it's insisting that we interact with each other on a more professional level. We don't have to like each other even, but we do have to work together. And I think we need a mayor that sets the tone for professional conduct by example and insists on the Board of Aldermen conducting themselves in a professional manner, both in and outside the Board of Aldermen meetings. I think by doing that, that will allow us to focus on the redevelopment of Brentwood or the infrastructure programs or any of the other complex things that we need to address. If we spend all of our time arguing and bickering with each other over relatively minor points, then we will not spend the time focused on these things that are important to the community. And I think that does everybody a disservice, and I would do my best to prohibit that.
Thank you. Mr. Toohey.
I would start this process by letting each branch of the local government realize its place. And that is at the meetings, let the Board of Aldermen actually guide the city in the direction it wants to head in. And as the mayor, feel free to interject the opinions as well as advice. But overall, let the Board of Aldermen conclude its own independent decisions. And as the mayor, go out there and execute those decisions. I think that will take away from the contention and domination by just one branch of government at those meetings and allow all on the board to feel like they're participating in the future of our city.
Thank you. And Mr. Wilson.
I would agree with Mr. Toohey. I think we definitely need to count on our board, but I do think some steps need to be taken in order to move our board forward. In the private world, we oftentimes spend time making certain that we put together groups in order to get people to work together to push a project forward that maybe they're not spending as much time working together or as positively working together as they possibly could. I think one of the big issues right now is we don't have the public trust. And one of the first things that needs to occur is we need to be professional in business. We need to be honest and open in order to make sure that the people know what it is that we're trying to accomplish, how it is we're trying to accomplish it, and they have part in trying to accomplish it. It's much easier to move some business forward if, in fact, you make them part of the resolution as opposed to an outsider looking in. I think that transparency, that honesty, that accountability will accomplish exactly that, and I think we need somebody strong in management to accomplish it.
Thank you. And our fourth student is Megan Shipley.
What is one characteristic of Brentwood you would like to change as mayor?
Mr. Toohey.
I think this has been repeated, but I think the contentiousness. You know, we're a great community. I look out here and I see a lot of great people. And even though we might have differing opinions, I feel like I've established great relationships with those who have a different opinion. And I don't know why we can't be a community where we can disagree but still meet and have civil discourse. And, you know, exchange ideas. We don't have to attack the dissenters who have a different opinion. I really want to get back to the point where we can exchange ideas and not personally attack those who have a differing opinion.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson.
Couldn't agree more with Mr. Toohey. One of the things that I've discussed with many residents in a number of meetings is that you can walk the streets of Brentwood and you won't find an individual on the streets that's not going to be exceptionally pleasant with you and very kind and spend a moment of time with you just getting to know you. However, when we take it to the boardroom, for whatever reason, people feel as if they have to turn a different page. I can tell you that one person, Ed Wright, shared with me in one situation, the situation of Sandra O'Connor, one of the Chief Justices, and she said that before I go into another session, I'm going to sit down and we're going to shake hands and we're going to look each other in the eye and say, we're going to abdicate the issue and not the person. I want to make this situation to where we can appreciate each other, we can respect each other, and we can move forward simply addressing the issue and not attacking the person.
Thank you. Mr. Thornton.
Well, at the risk of piling on, I do think that that is our single biggest problem. And I think it says something that all three of the candidates up here say that that is the single thing that they'd like to change the most. I'll tell you how I would go about it. And that's, I'm a big believer in communication. And the most important part of communication is listening. And I would meet with every single member of the city government, every single member of the city staff, and I would listen to what they're telling me they perceive as the problems. And by doing that, I hope to learn a lot about what's really going on, and not just what's really going on, but how people perceive that it's going on. Because it's just as important how people are perceiving it as is what really you think is going on. If they think it's unfair, then it is unfair, at least from their point of view. So I would sit down and do a lot of listening before I would do a lot of talking. And then I would do my best to lead by example. And I don't think that there's anybody in this that's involved in city government that won't be able to find some common ground with all the other people involved, because they're all up there for the right reasons.
First of all, I thank the students from Brentwood High School, and you should be proud. They stood up, they asked their questions. And as I understand it, they're all members of the debate team. And I think they would like to start debating, but that's not tonight.
They should come up and give us lessons.
Okay, the next question, we will start with Mr. Wilson. And some of these questions, by the way, the candidates have already answered. If elected, what are your priorities in the first 90 days of office?
Well, in the first 90 days, one of the first things that I do is bring about sitting down with a team building session with the Board of Aldermen to make certain that we get on the same page and understand that what we're trying to accomplish is for the people and not for any individual agendas. On top of that, I would make certain that we sit down and look at the internal controls and make certain that how we're handling our business is in a professional manner. We're looking at all details of how we're conducting company business and move it forward like exactly that, a business. That being said, oftentimes people feel a little bit scared when new management or new direction is coming in. And I think, to Mr. Thornton's point, you need to come in, you need to observe, and you need to listen. And you need to start to understand the processes, the policies, and how that city government is run. And understand that you can't make immediate changes. You need to sit down, understand it, and then thoroughly think it through, talk it through with others, and then make a decision about how you're going to strategically move forward.
Thank you. And Mr. Thornton?
So is it easier to pass the mic, or is this easier?
Pass the mic.
Okay, pass the mic. Okay, very good. All right, how's that? I'll hold it away a little bit. In the first 90 days, I think the most important thing that the mayor does in the first 90 days is make his appointments. And that includes various city offices, the committees on the Board of Aldermen, and the various committees that help us run the government. I think in order to do that, you have to meet with a lot of stakeholders, and not just the people in the government, but also the people in the community, the school board, the people that run the local charitable organizations who are involved with the city government, and also the various organizations, the big organizations, business organizations in the community. Again, my goal in doing that would be to listen. I would be looking for advice from people who they think should be involved in making those decisions on their behalf, right? Who would be good candidates for those committees? Who would be good candidates for those positions? I would also be looking at putting together our membership in the various committees that work together, that can work together and give us the most effective people on the government.
Those signs don't want to stay put.
Well, first I'd like to say the stumble in my opening comment was completely the microphone's fault. As far as my first 90 days, what I would like to do is meet with the individual aldermen one-on-one and see where we can build common ground, find out their top 1 or 2 priorities, align those up, and show them on the Board of Aldermen where we all have unity. At the same time, I would ask them each, how would they like to see the meetings run? What is it that they haven't liked occurred in the past, and what would they like to see occur in the future? And then focus on a few small items we can work as a board together and try and show a team. Additionally, I would also like to focus on setting up a citizen-based audit committee. If you look at the audit recommendations from our external auditors, that's still an outstanding item that hasn't been addressed by the board, one I've tried to bring forward in the past. And I think that'd be a great committee to show the residents that there is a group of residents out there watching the Board of Aldermen and making sure that oversight is taking place.
Thank you. If I'm not mistaken, we start with Mr. Thornton. And this is a more specific question. Money was diverted from planned upgrade to the Brentwood EMF, from the Brentwood EMF services to fund other projects. ECDC has failed significantly. Would you be inclined to find money to restore in-house Brentwood EMS, and why?
No, I wouldn't. And the reason is because when I met with Chief Fitzgerald and Chief Jury and asked them how the ECDC service was meeting their needs as the stewards of our public safety, they told me that ECDC was not perfect, but as it is today, it's better than what we had before. Both of them told me that unequivocally. And I am not going to substitute my judgment for the fire chief and the police chief and their 30 years of experience. I don't know anything about running a fire department. I don't know anything about running a police department. But I do know that we have 2 highly qualified individuals in those positions, and I don't think that either of those gentlemen would tell me that if they felt that they were seriously putting the lives of the citizens or any of our first responders at risk.
Mr. Toohey, yes.
Okay.
I also now look to replace ECDC. One of the reasons is this program has offered the city some additional benefits we didn't have in the past. When going out for mutual aid calls, often now in our society, when the fire department has a call, they have to reach out to many municipalities. ECDC allows the ability for the city to reach 5 or 6 municipalities in one call. Additionally, with the incidents we've seen in Ferguson, we've seen multiple police communities need to act as one. we've had protests in here from that incident, I feel more assured with having ECDC in place for the disaster, for any possible disasters that could occur. Additionally, as far as the hiccups that have occurred, there have been some. I'm disappointed those occurred, but those should be taken care of through the natural process of implementation. The county is implementing an 800 megahertz radio system, which will be given to all the municipalities, and this should resolve any issues which have occurred in the past. I'm confident will take place.
Thank you. And Mr. Wilson?
I would have an agreement to a certain degree. I've got some distinctions. I agree that Chief Jury and Chief Fitzgerald, when I met with them, as well as the mayor, all applauded the efforts of ECDC. The problem is I've met with a number of residents that have been very unhappy with the level of service. And the problem is also the negotiation of the contract that was done when ECDC was brought aboard. Just like we didn't build in safeguards in order to have Brentwood Boulevard accomplished, we did not build in safeguards to make sure ECDC was operating up to par. We need to make certain that when we do sit down and negotiate these contracts and put these into place, that we don't put the public safety of our residents or our policemen or our firemen in jeopardy. And one of the things that occurred with the transition to ECDC is it just wasn't done in the right way. You need to have these safeguards built in, so when you make the transition, it's done professionally and appropriately.
Thank you. No, it goes back to Mr. Tudor.
These are your future mayors.
No, you get the next question. How do you feel about Brentwood financing capital improvements with bond issue money like the fire station and rec center?
I think it comes down to our long-term planning. I think it's an acceptable practice because most businesses, the way they're run, they don't actually go out and build a business or some sort of structure just in one year funds. It takes long-term planning, and as long as there's a long-term strategic plan approach as far as monitoring past revenues and future revenues and making sure that our revenue stream will meet the obligations for funding those capital expenditures, I'm okay with that. I think it's really the best way to build our structures and our infrastructure in a timely manner where the residents can still use it.
Okay, Mr. Wilson?
Okay. I don't disagree. The problem that I have is, and I hate to go back to the well, is once again the manner in which you communicate and deal with the residents. We've got to reach out, embrace hearing what our residents have, and make certain that they know ahead of time what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it. Oftentimes, projects such as this, and why they haven't been supported, is because residents haven't been given a complete plan, and it hasn't been provided transparently. If we can simply make certain that we don't act like we know better than the residents and somehow it's too sophisticated for others to learn. I know that when I speak to my wife, she's a labor attorney, she has to dumb it down for me. There's a way to simplify and still communicate, and I think that's one of the things that we need to accomplish with our residents in order to regain their trust.
I don't think there's anything wrong with financing capital improvement projects by issuing public debt. But I do have a question. How many people in the audience tonight knew before this question was asked that we finance those projects by issuing public debt? Okay, that's more than I expected, to be honest with you, because I've gone around talking to a lot of people and I don't know that there are that many people that are aware of it. I think we need to just be very clear about these things when we're doing them and make sure that everybody understands how they're being financed. I think there's a little bit of a view that we have a lot of money that's available to us, and we are blessed with a lot of resources, but I think that that impression can lead us to do things that, that are maybe not needs but wants, and lead us to make imprudent decisions with our money. And I think that we need to be very clear about what we're trying to do with our money before we spend it. For example, would you have repaved roads or a fire station? Those types of questions need to be asked before we move forward on those projects.
Thank you. And Mr. Wilson, we start with you. As mayor of Brentwood, apparently here it is the practice that if council has a tie vote, the mayor breaks that vote. And the question is, what factors would be involved for you to break a tie?
Well, once again, it comes down to listening. It become educating myself about the topic and the issue, trying to understand what experts provide you as far as understanding the pros and cons of a situation, hearing the aldermen and speaking in session in order to try to understand what their points of view are, and then once again listening to the constituency of the residents. Oftentimes, there might be projects that I personally might believe need to be ventured forward or would be positive to have ventured forward. However, what we need to do as a whole is listen to our residents and listen to what their personal interests are. Look at how it affects them. When we put a project in Ward 3, we can't expect that that project is going to impact Ward 1 as much as it impacts Ward 3. So we've got to listen to the people who are affected, and we need to listen to the community as a whole.
Thank you. And we go on now to Mr. Thornton.
I think the mayor has a special position. He's the only elected official that represents the entire city. The aldermen are elected to represent their wards, but the mayor has to represent the entire city. And I think in order to do that, you have to kind of put aside whatever your personal view of a particular issue might be, and look to what's best for the city as a whole when you're considering whatever the particular issue might be. The second thing I think that's important to do, particularly from the mayor's chair, is to consider the long-term impact of a decision. You have to be willing to think about, is this a good decision for 10 years down the road? I mean, we're doing it today, but how's it going to affect the community 10 years down the road? Yeah, you might not be in office or whatever, but the people in the community still have to live with the results of that decision. And so I think the mayor is in this particular spot to be able to make those two considerations primary in how he votes, as opposed to the alderman who may have other considerations.
And Mr. Toohey?
Well, each situation will be its own unique set of circumstances, but it would be a combination of what the residents want, any professional opinions given by outside counsel, or our own internal directors, chiefs, as well as what I think is the best for the city. To give a guideline of how to reach the conclusion, if there was a decision giving the city a future direction, how to allocate funds, where they want them spent, do they want to hire more staff, would they rather money spent on infrastructure? That's direction. I will listen to as many residents as I can and go where I think the majority is. If we're looking at an issue regarding public safety and what's the best method of conducting our first responders, then I'm going to listen to our chiefs as well as chiefs and other experts with that type of experience in the other municipalities and arrive at my conclusion. Doesn't mean I won't disregard the other factors. It's just be a different balance of circumstances. And not the greatest way.
Thank you. Mr. Thornton. I have a number of questions pertaining to each candidate's position on the Boys and Girls Home in Brentwood.
I think you mean Boys Hope, Girls Hope.
I'm sorry, Boys Hope and Girls Hope. I'm sorry.
Sure. The thing that concerned me most about Boys Hope, Girls Hope is the way we conducted the debate. To me, that issue, no matter whether you're on the side in favor of that project or not in favor of that project, it seemed to me that the debate quickly became a we versus them shouting match. And I don't believe that that type of debate leads to the best decision for anyone. I think that that type of debate just proves who can shout louder and who can throw the most dirt in the air. Again, as your mayor, I don't think it's probably appropriate for me for you to know how I would have voted on that subject, because what I would have tried to do is be the person in the middle to make sure that each side got a fair hearing and that we were dealing with facts and having rational debate about it instead of the way the debate was conducted. I think that leads to the best decisions for everybody involved, and that's what I would have tried to do in that situation.
Mr. Toohey?
Well, I can comment on this because I did have a vote in that situation. And I knew when that first proposal first came, it was going to be a controversial application for the city. Because this was a unique program and something new to the city. But when you look at it from a pure structural standpoint and how it ought to outline the city, we're always trying to come up with a soft blend between commercial and residential. Instead of just a hard line of commercial development and then boom, houses right there. I thought this was a fantastic idea to have something that was a combination of residential as well as commercial, a soft blend in the neighborhood. On top of that, I also thought it was the right thing to do. And it was a wonderful opportunity to give 20 kids who don't have the same resources we all grew up with an opportunity to share in it and live bright futures going forward. I was disappointed with the outcome of that decision.
And Mr. Wilson?
You're going to have to forgive me because I anticipated this question. I had some very pointed views, and it was single family and not PD use. It was an institutional building with no adequate buffers. And really what it came down to a lack of our leadership's communication in order to make sure our residents knew exactly what was going on and when it was going on. It really was disheartening at how this project caused divisiveness within the community. Unfortunately, a number of people decided to make it very personal. And I think oftentimes it became a situation of people saying less than positive things about others. There was a very targeted mischaracterization about how people wanted to feel. They wanted to say these people hate children, they hate charities. And this is exactly the type of behavior that we're trying to remove from City Hall. And I, for one, am severely disappointed that these tactics were employed. Hardy debate is healthy, but this mischaracterization just underscores how we need to eliminate the person in the situation and instead advocate the issue.
Thank you. If my notations are correct, Mr. Toohey, you
We got to figure it out now.
It's an interesting question, and I've moderated many forums, but this is the first time. What are your thoughts on restricting parking to only one side of the street?
That's a very good question. And the reason I think that's an important question is because since we've upgraded some of our first responder equipment, namely the fire truck, we have found that there might be some difficulties driving up sides of the streets. Not to try and cop out on the direct answer, but I would like to do my decision on that be based on working with the fire chief as well as the police chief and determining if there is some sort of issue as far as our first responders getting up those streets and providing emergency services should there be a need, a fire, a 911 call, or some other circumstance like that. If that is not an issue, I would prefer to keep two-way parking on both sides of the street because it can become an issue for our residents. And that, we live in a tight community, a dense community, and I hate for residents who are short on parking or have to walk a block or two to their house. Part of the reason you live in a community like Brentwood is there should be a parking space in front of your house.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson?
I entirely agree with Mr. Toohey. I think we all know that there are different sizes of streets within our community. So as opposed to going down Pine or White, if you're going down Madge or Powell, you're going to have a much tighter situation getting through. To Mr. Toohey's point in regards to our emergency equipment getting through, we've had a number of residents who expressed a problem with a lot of speeding going on once things got rerouted for Highway 40, using McKnight and Pine and White and Rosalie as thoroughfares. This is a problem. And those streets don't necessarily need one-sided parking, but we also need to address the issue of how are we going to make certain that we address the issue of speeding and keep our neighborhoods safe. But bottom line, I think in the right situation with the right street and the size of the street, we have to look at the reality. And the reality in some circumstances is we can only make driving through a neighborhood possible if we reserve it to one-sided street parking.
Thank you, Mr. Thornton.
I think that what you do for one street, you don't necessarily have to do for all streets. We have a number of streets in our community that can easily accommodate parking on two sides of the streets, and there's no issue. There's a number of other streets. I can name one that I'm on frequently. It's Eulalie. And, you know, I almost got taken off my motorcycle and put into a very bad spot one night on Eulalie, and it's just too narrow when there's two cars parked. Now, do I think parking on only one side of the street is the answer? It might be, but the way to find out is to go and talk to the people who are affected by that decision, and that would be the residents of Eulalie, and see what they think. Then, you know, obviously we got to talk to the fire department and the police chief and some of the other folks, but I think, you know, the first thing I would do is call together a group of people who live on the affected streets that you're going to, you know, discuss doing this, and see what their thoughts are. Maybe they have, maybe they think it's a great idea, and maybe they have other ideas.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson, this has to do with budget. And it said that your TIF bonds have been retired, and there will be an increase in annual revenue. Do you spend it or save it for a rainy day?
What a good problem to have. Bottom line is we need to look at the overall budget. There's not one thing we can do with the TIF retiring without looking at everything that we're spending. And I think we need to sit down and look at our overall budget, look at our capital reserve. Right now, we recently went from a reserve of 4% a year ago to 14% recently, all because of the TIF bonds retiring. Well, the ICMA, or International City Managers Association, the Missouri Municipal League, will tell you that they recommend a minimum of 35% budget reserve. Think of the things that we could accomplish if we managed our budget a little bit more reasonably and we made things a little bit more accountable. We would have, of a $17, $18 million budget, we would have roughly $6, $7 million sitting in reserve. So if we tried to accomplish some other things, we'd have the ability to. Bottom line is, you can't look at just one thing and make a determination. You have to look at the overall picture. And then we need, after we come up with a strategic plan for the city, we decide how we're going to move forward.
Mr. Thornton.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
It has to do with the retirement of TIF bonds, and that the city will have an increased annual revenue. Do you spend it or save it for a rainy day?
Thank you. Yeah, the first thing with the TIF is to recognize, you know, the two TIFs that have been retired, and they've been retired significantly early, are producing an annual revenue to the city's general fund of about $2 million, something in that neighborhood, which is a fairly significant amount of money. You know, do you spend it or save it? I'm not sure those are the only two options. I have a third option in mind, and that's invest it. I would invest it in infrastructure. Like I said before, I think that we've gotten a little bit behind on things like roads, parks, sidewalks. I think going around Brentwood, you see these things, and they could be better. And so, you know, like I said, I favor the third option, and I'm sorry that's why I asked you to repeat the question. I wanted to see if there was a third option, but my third option would be to invest it. Spending is fine, but I think we spend a pretty good amount of money in the city and get services for it. I think saving is fine, and I think we could do some of that, but investing would be my preferred choice.
Thank you, Mr. Toohey.
Give this question. As I stated earlier, as a member of Ways and Means, we have allocated more resources towards infrastructure along the streets and sidewalks. Additionally, when I joined the board, our reserve was around 4%, and actually by the end of fiscal year 2015, we're projected to be at 31%. We're currently around 25%. I think once we've broken the 30% threshold, we're pretty well secured, and at that point, I would like to allocate more funds, again, as Chris mentioned earlier, towards infrastructure in the city, but not just streets and roads, but also increasing our parks, getting a set of trails. There recently was a master parks plan submitted to the city, and it showed a great way to connect all of our parks, as well as making upgrades in our parks. Some other thoughts would be safe passage across Brentwood Boulevard and Manchester Boulevard. The option of putting an underground tunnel under Manchester was brought up. I'd also like to try and propose this around Brentwood Boulevard. maybe somewhere around Linsinger, so that every child in Brentwood, every bike rider, every jogger could move from side to side without having to enter the traffic.
Thank you. Mr. Thornton, a number of people have asked about passing an ordinance in Brentwood eliminating texting by all individuals when driving.
I don't think there's anybody in this auditorium that wouldn't agree with me that our town would be a safer place if we had an ordinance against texting and driving. And I think we should pass an ordinance to do that.
Mr. Toohey?
Sorry. Lost track.
I agree that everyone in this room would agree drivers should not text while driving. There was an issue brought up to the Board of Aldermen with a possible ordinance. However, there were some issues with the ordinance that was proposed. It was actually one of the first times I saw the board work as a team without any political division or questions and answers towards our police chief. The issues that raised my concern and why I voted against it were, one, we asked if the other municipalities that have put this ordinance in place, have they been able to see reduced behaviors from drivers? We were told that data wasn't available or no one knew. Additionally, we asked how would you distinct if a driver was texting, sending an email, on Facebook, on their GPS, or simply using the speakerphone feature of the phone. How would you know these differences? Would you be able to ticket in all instances? We weren't given a clear answer. Additionally, we were told some municipalities that passed this have only given maybe 5 tickets. So from that, I did not see that we're actually implementing an ordinance that would reduce behavior. If an ordinance came before the board that could.
Thank you, Mr. Toohey. Mr. Wilson.
Yes, I happened to attend the meeting along with Mr. Toohey, and when I first walked in, the first thing I thought is, of course, we want to ban texting. The problem is it was not communicated in the right way, and it was not drafted in the right way. It was brought about by it's the same ordinance that exists in Kirkwood right now. There's 7 municipalities around the area that actually have a no texting while driving or no distracted driving ordinance in place. This one, though, they didn't know exactly how they were going to enforce it. They didn't know how to communicate it, and it hadn't been thoroughly vetted. When I did reach out to Chief Fitzgerald afterwards and asked him if we have some laws in place that exist now, if they in fact could be used in the interim until we did either draft the proper language or we waited for the legislature, which I don't see happening, that we could in fact enforce the same law while waiting for the new draft to be presented to the board simply a month later.
Let me tell you, there's been lots of questions. You've been sitting very kindly for an hour. But I have to ask this one question. And then there will just be one final question, and they will give them their closing statements. How in Brentwood can you address an ongoing pay inequity between men and women?
Well, I'm not aware of any data out there showing our men and women aren't paid the same salaries. I definitely think that pay should be determined on the quality of work produced and not by one's gender. And I would hope we're in a society and a city that promotes the same types of values and ideals. That's about all I have.
Okay, Mr. Wilson.
I would agree with Mr. Toohey. It doesn't come down to anything other than you are paid for your merit and what sort of value that you provide to your employer. And bottom line, the sheer fact that we have to deal with any of these inequities anymore is somewhat embarrassing. We've been able to jump great bounds in the last 40 to 50 years relative to racial situations, relative to gender issues, relative to religion. And I'm sorry to say that, Ferguson has taken us back a step a little bit. And right now, I think what we need to do is sit down, and fortunately we've had this recent salary compensation survey. If that distinction does exist, certainly we should address it immediately. But I think we need to sit down with that salary compensation survey and look at our entire force and figure out exactly how we're paying our employees, if they're up to industry standards, if it's staying with the spec along with professional situations that we're not overpaying or underpaying our employees. And we certainly shouldn't distinguish that by gender.
Thank you. Mr. Thornton?
The simple answer is to pay the women more. But I don't think that's the whole answer. Look, we have over 100 employees in Brentwood, and one of those employees is a director of HR. And this would be, I would think, right up her alley. If I was mayor, I would simply go to her and ask her to do a study and find out if we have any pay inequity in our city payrolls. And if we do, then we need to address that problem right away. I don't have any data that would allow me to state whether that is or isn't a problem, but I assume that our director of HR could produce that data relatively quickly, and she could tell us how we could remedy that situation as soon as possible.
Thank you. The women in the audience appreciate that. Okay, the last question to you all at this time, because we want to give you all an opportunity to speak individually with the candidates. There are questions here on transparency. There's questions here on race relations. And I just don't think you want to be here for another hour. And we start then with Mr. Wilson. Is that right?
Yes.
Why do you want to be mayor?
Well, it comes down to that I care passionately about this community. I lived here when I grew up. I left for 15 years, bounced around the country, and my wife and I moved back here because we wanted to have a child, and we knew about the sense of community in Brentwood. I know that when I come back here that the school services are going to be positive. We've got a great school system. My son, who happens to have SSD services, he's had a situation that has no comparison. When we looked around at other opportunities, other places, the only place you can get that sort of support is in Brentwood. And we've become involved. We love this. We're passionate about the community. We want to make a difference, and only recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, when I stopped traveling a little bit more, I said, hey, selling beer for a living is really not curing cancer. I'd like to give back to my community, and maybe there's a way in which I can do it. And that's when my wife and I decided collectively to do this.
Mr. Thornton?
I think the biggest reason I want to be the mayor is because I think this is a really important time for Brentwood. We have, with the retirement of the TIFs, as we mentioned, we have significant resources in addition to the resources that our town's already been blessed with. And I think that how we do things in the next 2 to 3 years could really impact our future for a lot longer period of time. I also think we have an interesting situation where having gone through some of the events we've gone through in the last 4 or 5 years, we've got a very contentious type of situation that's developed. And I think it's very important to get that addressed so that we can make good decisions regarding what to do with our prosperity. And I think somebody who comes to the table with no background, no previous affiliation with any part of what's going on in the city government, and can sit down with everybody and say, hey, I'll work with you in good faith to get past some of these things, has a real chance to get us to the point where we can start working together and move forward on those issues.
Thank you.
Well, like the other two candidates, I think we're all very passionate about this city. It's our home. We've been here a number of years, and we're going to see great things because we don't plan on leaving. And this is a very important time for the city of Brentwood, that we're going to see possible revitalization of the industrial court. We could see our park system revisited. At some point, we'll need to redo City Hall as well as the library. I hope all this comes with a long-term strategic plan. I think how it's going to benefit the city for the next 20, 30 years. As an alternate sitting in the meetings, sometimes when we were bringing up future construction plans, I didn't see long-term planning. I saw a little bit of short-sightedness, and I want to restore the Board of Aldermen back. We're not nitpicking at each other and focusing on minor issues, but think about these long-term strategic issues. So we're a wonderful city for 20, 30, 50 years from now. That's why I want to be mayor.
Each candidate will now give a 2-minute closing statement. We will start with Mr. Thornton, who is number 3 on your ballot. Mr. Thornton, you have 2 minutes.
Number 3 on your ballot. Look, I really want to see city government focused on issues that matter. That's the bottom line. I think if we focus on issues that matter and have a community-wide impact, then we will be doing our jobs. And that's really what I want to see. Brentwood is blessed with tremendous resources, right? And I want to see us focus our energies on how to use those resources in a positive way. And to the extent that we focus on other things that don't matter, then we won't be making good decisions on how to use those resources going forward. I would like to see us work on things like the redevelopment of Manchester Boulevard. I would like to see us work on things like repaving our streets, building good sidewalks in all our neighborhoods. I would like to see us work on things like redeveloping Brentwood Boulevard to some extent so that it presents better as people come through. I'd like to see us work on building a town community center and some other great ideas that have come up. But the fact is that those projects are really complicated. They're going to require us to work with the Missouri Department of Transportation, the county, the state, the Corps of Engineers, and a bunch of other people. And that makes things incredibly hard. They're incredibly hard to get done, even when you're working together. If we're not working together, we have no chance to pull those things off, because we have to approach it with a united front in order to get those things done, to get all the other things in line to make those things happen, and I want to see that happen. We have the highest level of services in Brentwood of any municipality in the St. Louis County. We have exceptional schools, we have low property taxes, we have strong community organizations like the Lions and the Optimists, we have a vibrant religious community. It's a great place to live, and I think if we learn how to work together, we can make it even better.
Thank you. Mr. Mark Wilson will be 2nd on your ballot.
Okay, this has actually just become a very personal situation for me, because we want Brentwood to be better, and one of the problems up at City Hall has been the divisiveness and how people haven't been working together. I've reached out to numerous organizations. I've reached out to the Lions Club, the Brentwood Forest residents, the library board, as well as all the aldermen and about 50 plus businesses around the area. And one of the consistent messages through everything is that they do not feel welcome bringing their ideas to City Hall. They don't feel like they're included as part of the situation, much less the solution. And they don't feel like they're being attended to either. So as a whole, we all need to listen more. On top of that, certainly we can look at some of these long-range plans that Mr. Thornton referred to. But in the interim, we've got to attend to our citizens, both business and residential, to make certain that some situation like the Manchester corridor is not ignored for 40 years. We've got to have ADA compliant situations where people can walk around the street and walk down the sidewalk and not worry about being hit by gravel or glass. There's a situation that's been ignored since literally the early 60s along the Manchester corridor, which, sure, we need to look at a project that might enhance things over time by burying those wires and taking down those poles. But in the interim, we can't ignore those people or those businesses. We need to take care of them. Only recently, I was walking up to a business person, and they had taken down my sign. And unfortunately, it was an individual who said, Pat Kelly called me, told me that I'm supporting Chris Thornton, you can support Chris Thornton too. You know, that's the sort of backdoor stuff that has occurred for 20 years and does not need to occur anymore. I'm not about games, I'm not about backroom politics, I'm about community and I'm about people. I have managed people professionally for 30 plus years, and I am about sitting down with our people and our board and our community and building consensus.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Then we have Patrick Toohey, and he will be number 1 on your ballot.
Again, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting tonight's event, the residents for coming out and asking wonderful questions, and the other candidates for engaging in the exchange of ideas. Over the last 20 years, we've seen a resurgence in the city's northeast section, which has secured Brentwood's financial future. Because of this, we can remain a financially independent municipality with our own unique identity and culture. Somewhere along the way, though, of securing this financial future, the residents became fractured at the changes taking place in our city. Some of those residents have their feelings towards our spirit, purpose, and pride towards the city get chipped away at. As mayor, in addition to focusing on our financial future, what I'd like to promise all of you residents is a resurgence of our community spirit, a resurgence of our community purpose, and a resurgence of our community pride. I ask to lead that resurgence on April 7th with your vote.
Thank you. Some of the questions were not asked because the candidates had already addressed those issues. But I think a hand should go to Pat Jones because she physically did the work for this tonight. Pat.